Welcome to 1x TV. In this live episode, we're talking about King Karanos, the founder and the first king of the ancient Macedon. Before we begin, I'd like to thank to everybody joining us live right now. I'd like to thank to all of the channel subscribers, all of the Patreon members, and all of the YouTube members. Shout out to Ostipes in the chat, the first comment, and also Stolzer. Also, special thanks to Hackathon, aka Jason, for the previous episodes. Super thanks, appreciate it. Hopefully, we see Jason on the live episode in the chat today as well. We'll see how many of the regular people will be here. Santiago is here. Shout out to Santiago. Horn sent as well. Um, This month we will have the Etruscan documentary finished, and I'm looking at two dates on when the documentary will be published. One possibility is Saturday the 20th, depending on when we are going to be completely finished with the project. Right now we are at, let's say, 95% done. Another option is the 27th, between Christmas and New Year's. As I have mentioned many times throughout these live episodes, we haven't been doing regular content for a few months now because I have been working on the Etruscan civilization documentary. It will be 2 hours long, the biggest project by far on 1x TV. It will be the best quality that we have ever done, and we will cover comprehensive history of the Etruscan civilization over there. I have a professional narrator for the episode. It will be Thomas Wicello. Thank you very much to Thomas for that. And Etruscan civilization video will cover the complete history, including their origins, the theory on their identity, starting from ancient Greeks and Romans and surrounding peoples, also Etruscans themselves, Etruscan language, their mythology, their early history, their adoption of actually development of the Etruscan alphabet based on the Greek alphabet, their relationship with the Greeks, with the Phoenicians, with the Italic peoples, Celts, and obviously their struggles with the Romans, ultimate fall at the hands of the rising Roman Republic. Santiago says, "What a Christmas gift!" Well, the production has been going slower than expected, but that's because I wanted to make sure that everything is on point and that really for that amount of time that I put into the production, I wanted to make sure that every detail is done on the standard that I wanted, and we'll see. It will be the best video that we have done, and like I said, there are two options. One option, which is more ambitious one, is Saturday the 20th, so that would be about 2 weeks from now. And another option is either Saturday 27th or maybe Sunday the 28th. We'll see, depending on how fast I'm able to finish the production. Right now, almost everything's done. I think we have maybe like 10 or 15 minutes of animations, and the music, the background music, that's the only two things that we have that we're working on at the moment. Everything else is done, and the Etruscan civilization should land on 1x TV before the end of the year. After that, we will continue with the regular live episodes. We will also continue with the regular episodes, the ones that we had always done on the channel, the 10, 15, 20-minute episodes, 2-3 episodes per month, plus, let's say, two live episodes every week. Should be a lot of content. And that's the plan for 2026. also in the plans is 1x TV in Greece. So let me pull up the calendar. There will be more updates in the coming days on that. One second. Let's see. So most likely we will be in Greece in February and mid-February. So as it stands right now, we should be in Greece mid-February, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, and the 16th. Athens is obviously where we're going to be stationed. We'll likely go to Thessaloniki as well, perhaps another location in Greece. I'll visit Mycenae, of course, as well as some of the other sites, and we might do some gathering. So stay tuned, everybody that's from Greece. Stay tuned. There will be a lot of updates when it comes to that as we approach the dates, and we might have some special guests with us. It will be very interesting. Leophoros, shout out to Leophoros in the chat. So, with that being said, the topic of the day is Karanos, the first king of Macedon and the founder of ancient Macedonia. We have the segments on the screen right now. First, we're going to go through a little bit of background on Macedonia itself, foundation, the early mentions of Macedon, and the identity of ancient Macedonians. Then we'll touch on the dating of Caranus, which is very interesting because there are some contradictions in the sources when it comes to ancient Macedonian traditions, Greek mythology. How well does that correspond to the accounts of Greek mythology when it comes to fall of the Mycenaean Greece, establishment of Dorians in Argos, and so on. And then the third and the fourth segment are specifically about Karanos himself and his endeavors. First is the foundation of the kingdom of Macedon, the myth of Karanos' arrival to the area of Macedonia, specifically a region then called Emathia or Emathia. And then we'll touch on the reign of King Karanos in these very early days of Macedon, which are more based on ancient tradition than contemporary historical sources. We're talking about perhaps 8th century BC, which is the end of the Greek Dark Ages / beginning of the Archaic times in Greece, but Macedon, since it was rather a backwater region on the edge of the Greek world, so to say, Dark Ages lasted a little bit longer over there. And this will be the first live episode on ancient Macedon. All right, so when it comes to ancient Macedonia, as you can see on the screen right now, it's located on the edge of the Greek world, or of the ancient Greek world, and you will soon see it on the screen. I'm sure that 95%, at least 95% of people here know exactly where ancient Macedon was located. We're talking about the area in today's Greek province, Greek region of Macedonia, to the south of Thessaloniki, southwest of Thessaloniki, the area around Pella and Aigai, to the north of Thessaly. Leophoros says we still use the name Emathia for for a certain part of Macedonia. Am I correct in my pronunciation, Leophorus? Is it Emathia? Is it the correct one, or should I just go with Emathia, which is more of an English sounding pronunciation? So you can see right now on the map, you can see where, well, you cannot see Pella on the map because this is very early time of Macedon before the foundation of the city of Pella. So you can see Edessa on the screen, and you can likely see Aigai on the screen as well, or perhaps not. So Edessa, according to some versions of the story, is an earlier name of Aigai, the old royal capital before the establishment of Pella, which was at some point renamed from Edessa, a pre-Macedonian name, to Aigai, which from then on became the capital of the kingdom. As you can see on the segment part of the screen, the kingdom was founded at the end of the Greek Dark Ages. It was mentioned by Hesiod for the first time, so that was the earliest mention of Macedonia or Macedonia, and an individual named Macedon, who is in Greek mythology, as mentioned by Hesiod, eponymous ancestor of the tribe of the Macedonians. I believe in Hesiod, Macedon is a brother of, is it Magnus, the ancestor of a tribe inhabiting Magnesia. Either way, uh, Macedon is mentioned by Hesiod, and Hesiod wrote presumably at some time in the 8th century BC, contemporary or near contemporary to Homer. As we can see, there are connections to Epirus and to the Dorians. The Dorians, one of the ancient Greek tribes, which famously migrated southwards at some point in history. A portion of them migrated southwards, establishing their cities on Peloponnese, such as Sparta, Argos, Corinth, region of Messenia, and Megara, if I'm correct, as well as establishing themselves on Crete and on some of the Aegean islands, such as Dodecanese, the island of Rhodes, and southern colonies on the coast of Asia Minor. The Macedonians, we do know that they spoke Attic Greek dialect towards the end of the classical times, because Attic, the speech in Athens, was a speech of aristocracy, which was adopted by the Macedonian aristocracy at the time. But before that, as we know from Pella Tablet and perhaps some other ancient sources, the original speech of ancient Macedonians was the northwestern Greek dialect, which is a dialect of Doric speech. I do not have a map for you right now to show you the map of ancient Greek dialects, but it's a very similar, near identical dialect which was spoken in Epirus, and obviously ancient Macedonians and ancient Epirotes likely shared same roots. They were very close when it comes to customs, very close when it comes to language, and they shared some of the institutions. For example, Peliganes were members of the Council of Elders in both Macedonia and Epirus, especially in the tribe of the Molossians in Epirus, and Pelioi in both Epirote and ancient Macedonian dialects meant old men. So it was Peliganes were equivalent to Spartan Gerontes, for example. We know that Gerusia was a council of 28 elders plus 2 Spartan kings, which was the ruling body in Sparta. So Macedonians had something similar, except that king in Macedonia held much more power than the kings in Sparta. Leophorus, you said it correctly the first time. Emathia. Okay, sounds good. Perfect. I got it right. And for a long time, ancient Macedonia, or the region of Macedonia, the region of Macedon, was considered to be a backwater of Greece. Obviously, it was on the edge of the so-called Hellenic world, bordering Thracia, bordering Illyrian tribes, bordering Paeonians, Briges, and other non-Hellenic tribes. And many Greeks, especially actually specifically Athenians and the writers who are either lived in Athens or were aligned with Athens, have history of disregarding Macedonians. They often considered them barbarians, semi-barbarians, semi-Greeks, non-Greeks. Sometimes they were called Greeks, sometimes they were called barbarians. Especially Demosthenes, known Greek orator from the time of Philip II, was especially anti-Macedonian, and he was the one spreading the anti-Macedonian sentiment. Not that he was the original person. There were other writers who wrote either negatively of Macedonians or for whatever reason did not consider them to be Greek or fully Greek at the time. Many of the times that was tied to political adversarial stance towards expanding influence of Macedon. We'll talk about that in some of the next episodes. We do know that Alexander the First, king of Macedonia during late Archaic and early Classical periods, towards the late Archaic period in 504 BC, when he was still a prince before he became a king in Macedon, he participated in the Olympic Games, which were reserved for Greek tribes only. So I believe that the commission in Elis reviewed his case, and he was allowed to participate because he was Greek by blood. And it only shows that when it comes to Eleans, for example, who were in charge of the Olympic Games, they did consider at least Macedonian ruling dynasty to be Greek. Later, this would have been accepted more widely by the Greeks as the power of Macedonia expanded, especially under Philip II. They were allowed to become members of the Delphian, not Delphian League, but the Delphian Council, where it was a religious council regulating the rights of the city-states towards religious sites across Greece. Very important religious body respected in all of Greece. So during the time of Philip II, Macedonians were admitted into this council in Delphi. But even before that, even in archaic times, so this is before the Persian Wars, before the classical period, even then we have a case of Alexander I being allowed to participate in the Olympic Games. As we mentioned, under Philip II, we have hegemony. This is now the 4th century BC, and during the reign of his son Alexander III, aka Alexander the Great, we have total expansion of Macedonia. We have conquest of Persia, and we have the beginning of the Hellenistic period, which we're going to talk about in some of the next episodes in future. Basil HD, shout out to Basil in the chat, shout out to Napalm, who is presumably from Greece. Thank you for being here. So in the background right now, you can see the Pella Tablet. So this is the famed early Macedonian tablet, I believe dated to, I think it's the early classical period. Let me double check this. Let me double check this very quickly. Oh, so okay, it's dated to the early part of the 4th century BC, the Pella Tablet that you can see in the background right now. So this was written in the Old Macedonian script, which is a form of a Northwestern Doric Greek dialect, which shows that before the adoption of the Attic dialect by the Macedonian aristocracy in the in the 4th century BC, Macedonians indeed spoke a form of Doric dialect which was very similar, if not identical, to the Epirot dialect spoken in Epirus. Constantinus says, "Hello from Thessaloniki, capital of Macedonia or Macedonia. Shout out to you, and I will be in Greece in February, and I will probably visit Thessaloniki as well. We'll be based in Athens. There will be 1x TV with the whole team, maybe some special guests. We'll see. We'll do some gathering in Athens, and on my way towards on my way northwards, I will visit Thessaloniki as well. Obviously, there will be a few other locations besides Greece that we'll quickly visit. We might go through the Adriatic coast, so we'll visit some nice locations over there. And for that, stay tuned. We'll do a special episode on the trip across Greece. Unfortunately, I won't be able to stay there for too long. I believe about 4 days around weekend between Thursday and Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe Monday in Thessaloniki or Sunday. We'll see, but I'll be there. I'll be there. All right. So this was a quick overview of ancient Macedonians, their identity, their origins, their relationship with the Epirotes, their connections with Epirus. It is very we do not know for sure, but based on these, it is hypothesized that the ancient Macedonians, they have origin in the Epirote Mountains based on their similarity with specifically Molossians, the Epirote tribe of Molossians from rural areas of Epirus. So that might be where ancient Macedonians originate from. Obviously, this is not the case with the ancient Macedonian dynasty, which is founded by King Caranus, a person that we're talking about today. So when it comes to Karanos, he is considered to be the earliest king of Macedonia and the founder of the kingdom. He's likely dated to early 8th century BC based on the quotes which mention him as an earliest king before the time of the first Olympiad. And the first recorded Olympiad was in 776 BC. So it would have been the beginning of the 8th century for Caranus. There is no mention of him in the early historical sources among the ancient Greeks, specifically Herodotus and Thucydides, writing in the 5th century BC. They did not mention Caranus, they mentioned Perdiccas I as the first king of Macedonia. And Perdiccas, based on the dates of his successors, is more than likely a ruler of 7th century BC. But obviously, he could have not really been the first king of Macedonia and the founder, because if he ruled in the 7th century BC, we do know that Hesiod mentions Macedonia, and Hesiod mentions the eponymous ancestor of the Macedonians called Macedon. So Hesiod clearly lived before, he lived either in the 8th century BC or perhaps early 7th century. We are not sure, but he was either a contemporary or a near contemporary of Homer. So his knowledge of the Macedonians and his mention of Macedonia and their origins clearly preceding his own time clearly makes it impossible that Perdiccas, who came considerably later, would have been the first king and the founder of ancient Macedonia. So he was perhaps the earliest known king to Herodotus and Thucydides, or perhaps first historical king, perhaps the earliest king that could be traced historically by Herodotus, but obviously Macedonia itself existed in a period that predates Perdiccas I. Caranus himself is mentioned as the ancestor of Perdiccas, and the earliest sources that mention Caranus are Theopompus, living in the 4th century BC, as well as Marsyas of Pella. So Marsyas of Pella is a Macedonian historian. Unfortunately, much of his work is lost, and we know of his work through quotations from later historians. So we do know that these two individuals are the earliest ones mentioning stories concerning Karanos being the earliest king of Macedonia. Later, he would be mentioned by Strabo, Plutarch, Pausanias, and others as well. Rhythmna is in the chat. Shout out to Rhythmna, saying hello from Crete. Hello to you. Thank you for being here. So, in Greek mythology, as recorded by these sources, Karanas is mentioned as a son of Temenus. And Temenus is one of the Heraclidae that brought down the final Mycenaean king Tisamenus, which happened in about 1100 BC. So now we're talking rise of the Dorians in Peloponnese. This is the time of Temenus. So Caranus being mentioned as a son of Temenus is a stretch, as we can see, because we have a discrepancy of about 300 years. So that's now you can see when we talk about Greek mythology how not everything really makes sense. Not everything could be concretely connected to one another, and now sources mentioning Caranus being a son of Temenus, really it is very difficult to make that connection, because Caranus ruling in the 8th century BC, the early 8th century BC, at some time before the first Olympiad, clearly does not correspond to the time of Temenus, which is 300 years earlier, 1100 BC. I think the fall of Mycenae and the death of Tisamenus, the final Mycenaean king, is traditionally dated to 1104 BC. So the tail end of the 12th century, and which would place Temenus's reign at the end of the 12th and the beginning of the 11th century BC, clearly not corresponding to the reign of Temenus in the 8th century. So based on that, the presumption is that Temenus being mentioned as a son of Caranus being mentioned as a son of Temenus, the legendary king of Argos, should not really be taken literally because if he was, we do know that Caranus was of the Heraclid bloodline, he was of Temenus's bloodline, so perhaps him being a son of Temenus should be rather taken as Caranus being a descendant of Temenus, not literally his son, because we have 300 years between them. It's impossible that he would have been a son of Temenus. So perhaps Caranus being a descendant of Temenus would make more sense, but this is Greek mythology. This is just us speculating stories in Greek mythology. Whatever the case may be, Caranus is of a Heraclid bloodline, is of the bloodline of Temenus, legendary king of Argos, and this is where the ancient Macedonian royal dynasty originates from. This is likely what Alexander I presented to the Olympic Commission in Elis when they acknowledged that he was indeed Greek and was thus allowed to participate in the Olympic Games in 501. All right, so to summarize this dating issue when it comes to Karanos, him being an ancestor of Perdiccas, who ruled in the 7th century BC, we do know that uh, between Karanos and Perdiccas there are two other mythological kings of Macedon. So this time period does not span 300 years. This time period spans maybe about 100 years at the most, because Caranus, who is said to have ruled before the time of the first Olympic Games, on one side, Perdiccas ruling in the 7th century BC on another side, two other kings in between, I think Thrimias and another ruler, was it Koinos? Koenos? We'll get to him as well. So this information clearly places Caranus in the 8th century BC, thus clearly impossible that he would have been a literal son of Temenus, who was a king of Argos at the end of the 12th and the beginning of the 11th century BC, around 1100 BC, which further means that Caranus could have only been a descendant of Temenus, not his literal son. We have Demetros from Emathia. Shout out to you. Did I read this correctly? Demetros. Okay. Hopefully I did not mispronounce this. Demetros Papas. Shout out to you and thank you for being here. We have about, let's see, we're more than half an hour in, but I think that we began at 3 minute mark. We opened the stream and we really began with the topic, and maybe 7 minutes or so. We'll have to put timestamps on it after the episode, clearly. All right, so if anybody has any questions in the chat, feel free to ask me when it comes to ancient Macedonia. This is a very interesting topic. We did two regular 1x TV episodes on that. We did the foundation of ancient Macedonia. I believe about 6 months ago, or maybe even a year ago, and before that we did another episode of the origins of ancient Macedonia, ancient Macedonians. So feel free to check out those episodes on 1x TV channel. Let me see. All right. And we have Duars. He says Karanos sounds awful lot like Kora, Koranos, the word that he records as the Macedonian word for king of Macedon. So I'm not sure if Hesychlius means king of Macedon. So clearly, the title of a king is Basileus. I'm not sure. I would have to double check this. Shout out to James in the chat. He says the last time I was in Thessaloniki, I got hit in the head with a Nike, and someone dropped a bag of cement on my truck from an overpass. Well, I don't know what to tell you. I was in Greece. When was it? I was in Greece many times, 6, 7 times for sure. But that was when I was a kid, and when I was in high school. When I was what was the last time I was in Greece? Maybe 2015, 2016, something like that. Maybe 2015. And I always had a great time over there. Hospitality is great. I have a few locations that I always visit. I know some people there as well. And I'm sure that this time in the upcoming February, it will be great. James says it was in 1999. Oh, that was a long time ago. Actually, I think that I was in Greece when I was a little kid, around that time as well. I was in quite a few places. I was in Athens. I was in a few places in Peloponnese. Was in Mycenae, obviously, but I was also in Olympia, in Delphi, in Thessaloniki. I visited some of the tourist places. Halkidiki, I was there, I believe, twice. I was in Parga as well on the Ionian coast. So it's very nice. Hester Witzai is in the chat. He says, I love Thessaloniki, beautiful city. I was there last year. Shout out to Hester Witzai. Hopefully we can do something about February. We'll see. We'll see. But interesting times are coming, that's for sure. So shout out to History with Side. Thank you for being here. James says, beautiful city. I had been there before, and my best friend's mom is from Thessaloniki. Konstantinos, do we have any information regarding the Bronze Age Macedonia, the tribes living there? They were Greek tribes, Thracian or Phrygian. So Konstantinos, we do have some information regarding that area in the late Bronze Age. Uh, First of all, if we go by Homer, he does not mention Macedonia. He only mentions the areas of, I believe, Emathia and other small regions which you pass through as you go from Thessaly towards Halkidiki. So presumably in the late Bronze Age, the area of Macedonia was inhabited by early Phrygian and Thracian tribes. That's presumption that before the establishment of the Kingdom of Macedonia, Greeks did not really inhabit the space. It was only with Caranus that the Greeks arrive in the area and establish their kingdom. There is a place called Macedon, which is presumably where the Macedonia got its name historically, and this area of Macedon is a small mountainous area towards Epirus. So it's, I believe, on the border of Orestes, the region of Orestes, which is a mountainous region between Epirus and Macedonia. So in that area there's a small region called Macedon, which is possibly where ancient Macedonians got their name from and where they originate from as they slowly inhabited the region of what would become a lower Macedonia. So they slowly inhabited the region of Emathia and Pieria, I believe, and expanded from there. So to answer your question, Constantinos, the tribes living there in Bronze Age were likely not Greek tribes. They were likely Phrygian or Brigese, so Phrygian and Thracian tribes. So when we take care of the dating of of the time of King Karanos, we can start with the story regarding his whereabouts and how did he end up moving to northern parts of Greece and beyond the areas of Greek settlement and founded the kingdom of Macedonia over there. You're welcome, Constantinos. So, the foundation of Macedon, it brings us back to the time of the successors of King Temenus in Argos. This it brings us back to Argos in Peloponnese, and when we say successors of Temenus, as we have already discussed in the previous segment, it is very unlikely that these people in question, for example, Phaedon in Argos and Caranus, were literally sons of Temenus because they are separated by 300 years. It's impossible that they would have been his sons. It is more possible that they would have been his descendants. So keep that in mind when we say son of Temenus, we likely mean rather a descendant of Temenus because there's 300 years between them. Temenus 1100 BC, Caranus 800 BC. Okay. So at some point following the reign of Temenus in Argos, excuse me. So the throne of Argos is contested between a few brothers, several brothers, and one of them is Phaedon, who emerges victorious in this struggle, and he becomes the king of Argos, which prompts his younger brother or one of his younger brothers, Karanos, to leave the area. So Karanos decides to leave. It is unknown whether he contested for the throne of Argos or for whatever reason, upon Phaedon becoming king in Argolis, Karanos decides to leave with his companions. He takes a band of Argives, band of Greeks with him, and he goes north in a pursuit of settling a new area and creating a new kingdom for himself. Before he goes to northern Greece and beyond, he goes to Delphi first because he wants to consult the Delphian oracle. And he asks the oracle where he should go, where should he find his kingdom. The oracle tells him that he should look to find his kingdom in a place where there's a plenty of game and domestic animals. And thus Caranus continues, he takes advice from the oracle and he proceeds north. He travels through, he passes Thessaly and he goes all the way north of Thessaly, and he stops in a green valley where he finds, I believe, some cattle, some sheep or goats, which are running from rain, I believe, and he takes that as a sign of the oracle, and that's where he finds his capital, which ends up becoming the Aigai, the city of Aigai, the old royal capital of Macedonia before the city of Pella was founded. So when it comes to the foundation of the kingdom itself, there are two accounts which are slightly differing to one another. One account is of Marsyas of Pella, writing in the 4th century BC, contemporary of Philip II and Alexander the Great, I believe. And another account is Eusebius, who is a Byzantine time writer, and in his works called the Chronicle, he tells a story of perhaps addition to the original story, or perhaps differing a little bit to the original story. It is unknown where he got his accounts from, but we end up having these two accounts. So according to Marsyas of Pella, Karanos, when he leaves Delphi, he goes to Emathia with a band of Greeks, with his Argives, those who followed him from Argos. And at some point in a valley, he sees goats running from a downpour of water, and they run towards a city. That city was Edessa. The city of Edessa, which, according to the scholars, is the name Edessa is originating in Phrygian language, according to some scholars, and this is where this just adds on the question asked by Constantinus, who asked about the tribes living there before the Macedonians. He asked about the Thracians and Phrygians. So yes, Edessa would have been a Phrygian name. I believe it means a tower, or a tower on a water, something like that in Phrygian language. I would have to double check that actually. It's not like we don't have time, so I'll check on that. This. Yeah, so it is believed that word Edessa is derived from the Phrygian language, which would have been associated with the tribe of the Brigis, who are the European Phrygians before the Phrygians migrated to Asia Minor. So we are talking about the late Bronze Age period here, where when Phrygians still lived in Europe, in areas north of Greece. And word Edessa would have meant either a town on the water or a tower in the water. So, so when Caranus arrives, he presumably meets these early Phrygians, aka the Brigis, the Brigoi, and the the weather is terrible. It's a dense fog. It's a very rainy. It's downpour of rain. He sees these goats, and he interprets that as a sign of the oracle of Delphi, that this is where he needs to create his kingdom. He takes advantage of the terrible weather because the Edessians did not see him. They did not see a Greek army approaching, and with those terrible weather conditions, Caranus and the Argives are able to simply storm the city and take it without any resistance from the inhabitants, presumably early Phrygians. And he thus conquers the city of Edessa, and he makes Edessa the capital of his own kingdom, his own realm. So according to Marsyas of Pella, this is how Karanos founded the kingdom of Macedon originally. Now, why does he rename his kingdom to Macedon or Macedonia? We are not sure. We are not sure according to Greek mythology. Presumably, historically, it would have been named Macedonia because of Macedon, which is a small region towards Epirus in the mountains, where these early tribal Greeks originated from and went to Lower Macedonia, went to Edessa, to Aigai, and thus founded their own kingdom. But there's no explanation in the Greek mythology, so I guess we're not going to touch on that too much. Another account comes from Eusebius, as we have mentioned. He lived from 260 to 339 AD, or from 265, according to another account. And he is a Byzantine era writer, I believe a Christian writer, and he wrote a work called the Chronicle. And there he touches on the foundation of Macedon, and he mentions that he also there's no huge contradiction here. I think this is rather expansion to the original story, which Eusebius presumably got from somewhere, so possibly another ancient source which he um, had in possession, which we do not have, unfortunately. So Eusebius writes that Caranus and his Argive forces, they first arrived to the mountainous region of Orestis. Orestis, as we have already mentioned, is a small mountainous region which is located between Epirus to the west and Macedonia to the east. In classical times, it was considered a part of Upper Macedonia, and it was under the under the control of the kingdom of Macedonia. But still, even in the classical period, Orestes still kept its own king, its own ruler with the title of Basileus, and he was some type of a vassal king to the kings of Macedon. So even throughout history, even in the classical period and the Hellenistic period, Orestes, the region of Orestes, still kept its own king, still kept its own ruling dynasty. They had to provide soldiers to Macedonians, but they still had their own internal autonomy. Very interesting information. All right, a few new faces in the chat. Foklas, shout out to you. He says, like Larissa, which means castle in Pelasgian Greek, I think. So, yes, I think it means a fortress. So, Larissa means fortress, and this is presumably from a pre-Greek language or presumably Greek adoption from another language, which by extension presumably is associated with the Pelasgian. So you are presumably correct there. The Real Tomahawk, shout out to the Real Tomahawk in the chat. Always happy to see you here. He says Dardanus was king of Arzawa, called Arcadia in Greek. Arzawa was named Phrygia after the fall of Troy. Dardanus then went to Troy. I also heard Assyria was a vassal state of Troy at the time. Well, a lot of theories. Most of these theories are not connected specifically to Caranus and Macedon, so we might leave them for another episode. Uh, Tomahawk says Dardanus would be like Pelas. Oh, Dardanus. You mean the location Dardanus or the king Dardanus? A Hebrew speaker because his father is Zerah. So theories, connections. To Hebrews, to Assyrians, a lot of theories here, a lot of theories. We need I would need some time to analyze all of that so I could address that. A lot of theories there. So 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 according to Eusebius, coming back to the second version or the expansion on the original story, I believe. So Karanos and his Argive Greeks, they go to Orestes and they are welcomed with the king of Orestes at the time. And Orestians are at war with Eordians. Eordia is a region in the neighborhood towards Lower Macedonia, I believe, so to the northeast of Orestes. So these two regions are at war with one another, and Caranus strikes a deal with the king of Orestes that if Karanos helps Orestians win the war, they would receive half of the conquered territory, which is what Karanos ultimately ends up doing. So they help Orestes in their war against these neighbors. Orestians are victorious in the war, Eordians are defeated, which prompts King of Orestes to cede half of the conquered territory to Caranus, and on that territory, Caranus is able to found his own kingdom based around the city of Edessa, presumably, which he, in one version of the story, renames to Aigai. There's another version which says that Edessa was still a separate city and that Aigai was founded afterwards, perhaps a generation or two afterwards, perhaps by Perdiccas himself, and that only from that time Aigai was the capital of Kingdom of Macedon. So we are not sure. These are all different accounts of ancient Greek, ancient Macedonian traditions. There are no concrete evidence to support or discount completely either theory, so we are not sure when it comes to this. Leophorus says the area of Orestes, which, as you said, correct me if I'm wrong, was likely considered the starting point of the Macedonians. It is still the same name, and today it covers the areas of Castoria and Kozani. Yes, I know that. I think that uh, I believe until the 21st century, Greece was divided into first regions, and then the regions were divided into prefectures, right? And then those are like the smaller regional units. And under these smaller regional units, one of them was Orestes, if I'm correct. Today, correct me if I'm wrong, Orestes is a part of a region of Macedonia, or I'm not an expert on today's on the present time Greece's administrative division, so I'm not sure. Like you said, it borders Epirus. Yes, so originally I believe that the tribe of the ancient Orestians are actually they originate from Epirus as well. So they are very close to Molossians, which are Epirote tribe. Epirus was divided into many tribes, I believe over between 10 and 20 tribes, but three of the main tribes were Molossians, Thesprotians, and what is the third one? Hmm, interesting. What's their name? I will have to double check that. Is it Chionians? Let me see. Is it Chionians? Yes, Chionians. Yeah, I was right. Good. Good. I got confused with for a second. And Chionians are, I believe, considered to be the earliest holders of a territory that would have been later taken by the Molossians back in Epirus, but that's a whole another story. Either way, Molossians, who were a mountainous inland Epirot tribe, are considered to be where Orestians and Macedonians originate from, and then these early tribes are presumably inhabiting regions of Orestes and a small region of Macedon at some point, and then from Macedon, these people would later expand into Lower Macedonia and become known as the Macedonians. Duars says Makednos means tall slash or long in Attic Ionic Greek. E is typically a in other dialects, and then there's Makednos, which has a shortened a, but a similar meaning. Macedonia might be a way of saying land of the tall ones or highlanders. Yes, I believe that highlanders would be more correct. I believe that Highlanders would be appropriate term where how this came to be the whole origin of the Macedonians, especially their name. The tall ones, referring to the tall people, I'm not 100% sure on that. I think that Highlanders, meaning those who live in the highlands on the areas on the higher ground, meaning mountains, where they presumably originated from, makes much more sense. Yes, which fits its location, possibly its people. I agree with this. All right, we're already 1 hour in. Pretty impressive. Okay, so to reiterate the foundation of the kingdom of Macedon according to Greek mythology. So King Temenus passes away in Argos, and according to mythology, his sons, in reality, they're separated by 300 years, so it would have been his successors or his descendants, several brothers, they struggle for the throne of Argos. Ultimately, Phaedon becomes victorious and he crowns himself the king of Argos. We are talking about the time period before the first Olympiad, so very early 8th century BC, time around 800 BC. So Phaedon defeats his brothers, one of the brothers, Karanos, which may or may had not taken part in this struggle for the throne. For whatever reason, he decides to take his loyalists, his companions with him, and he goes north. He wants to find a good area to create his own kingdom, and he goes to Delphi first. He consults with the oracle. Oracle tells him to uh, create his kingdom where he finds plenty of game and domestic animals, cattle, and so on. Caranus takes that advice. He proceeds north with his Argive forces, according to Marsyas of Pella, historian of the 4th century BC from then Macedonian capital city of Pella. He says that Caranus goes to Emathia with a band of Greeks. He finds the goats running away from the rain downpour close to the city of Edessa, which is presumably early Phrygian city at the time, considering that word Edessa is believed to originate from a Phrygian language, meaning tower in the water or a town in the water. The Greek forces are able to storm the city without resistance because of dense fog and heavy rain, and thus Caranus creates his own kingdom in Edessa, which is then settled by his Greek followers, and that's the origin of Macedonia. Then over time, Caranus and his successors would expand the area in all directions. Edessa would become known as Aigai, which is the name of the old royal capital of Macedon before it was changed to the city of Pella. According to Eusebius, a Byzantine-era historian or writer, in his work called Chronicle, he adds that Caranus and the Argives, they first arrived to Orestes after leaving Delphi, and they meet with the king of Orestes, who is at the time at war with the Eordai or Eordians, a neighboring tribe. He decides to help the Orestians in their war, and ultimately they are victorious. The king of Orestes, he gives Caranus half of the conquered territory, and on that territory Caranus is able to create his own kingdom based around the conquered city of Edessa, which eventually becomes known as Aigai. Shout out to Yanis in the chat. Always nice to see Yanis here. Uh, he's here pretty much every episode, so thank you for being here, Yanis. He says Karanos from Kar, which means head, so he's the leader. It is related to the crown, corona in Greek, but also to the karakiri of the joke. Okay, this is a joke. Okay, sounds good. We have Rob. Shout out to Rob in the chat. He says hello again, Wenex. Glad to have made it to the stream. I have a question. Do you think ancient Macedonians were Greek or Hellenized Pelasgians slash Thracians or something else? Apologies if you've already covered this. So we touched on this topic a little bit, Rob. I mean, when it comes to genetics, I'm not an expert on genetics or the mixtures of the peoples. I do know that let's just circle back to this quickly. In the first segment, we have spoken about the origins and kind of the identity of ancient Macedonians. So Macedonians themselves, I do not think that they were Hellenized, well, not Pelasgians either way, because Pelasgians never inhabited this area to begin with, but Thracians and early Phrygians, this is another story because as we have already discussed, ancient Phrygians did live in this territory of Macedonia, and we do have historical mentions of the Brigis living in this territory as well. And the Thracians are very close neighbors, so before the Greeks arrived to the areas, two chief tribes which presumably inhabited the region of Macedonia, or what would become Macedonia, specifically Emathia, Botaia, Eordea, and other neighboring regions, which existed there before the Kingdom of Macedon was founded. So the chief tribes inhabiting these areas were these early Phrygian and early Thracian tribes. So did uh, did uh, did did any intermixture happened between Greek settlers in the area and these tribes? I'm sure that it did happen, and I'm sure that some of the so yes, I'm sure that it did happen, but when it comes to identity of the ancient Macedonians themselves, as you can see here on the screen, so uh, they their early language, the early dialect that they are recorded to had spoken before the adoption of Attic Greek in the 4th century BC, they did speak northwestern Doric Greek dialect. You can see it on the background on the screen right now. What you see on the background is the tablet known as the Curse of Pella, which is an early, very early written tablet. I believe from the 4th century BC. We just actually checked that. I believe it was from the 4th century BC. Yes, early 4th century BC, but before the adoption of Attic Greek alphabet. So this is what the ancient Macedonians spoke early on, a dialect very close to the dialect spoken in Epirus. So they also had very similar institutions to Epirus early on. Both Epirotes and Macedonians were ruled by a king with the title of Basileus, and both Epirotes and Macedonians had a council of elders which was underneath the king. These elders were known as Peliganes. In both languages, both dialects, Pelioi means old men. So this is something which is equivalent to Gerousia in Sparta, Gerontes being the 28 members of the Council of Elders, together with the two kings, who were the ultimate decision makers in Sparta. So we had something similar in Epirus and in Macedonia, and you can see from the language similarities, from the customs, from these early institutions, which actually survived well into the Hellenistic period, that ancient Macedonians were very close in language, in identity, in customs to ancient Epirotes. So, so taking that into account, together with the myths of the foundation of Macedonia, as reported by various ancient Greek writers, also ancient Macedonian writers specifically, such as Marsyas of Pella, that the ruling dynasty of Macedonia originated from Argos, and that his followers, his soldiers, his companions were Argive Greeks from Peloponnese, and ultimately they ended up settling the region, and also taking into account the reports of Hesiod when it comes to Macedon being the early, being the ancestor, the eponymous ancestor of the Macedonians, also considering a small region called Macedonon, which is where Macedonians are believed to historically uh, the historical origins of the name of the Macedonians. So based on all of the evidence, I would say yes, Macedonians were definitely an ancient Greek tribe, but perhaps we do know that they were considered to be barbarians by some of the Greek historians, especially the Athenians and those who are based in Athens. So perhaps they did have some intermixture with the conquered tribes, as it is always the case. If you take into account, for example, Massilia in southern France, it was a Greek colony, so Greeks founded it, but they had intermixture with the Celtic tribes. The same way Macedonians were a mixture of ancient Greek settlers from Argos, from Epirus, presumably with the natives being ancient Phrygian tribes and ancient Thracian tribes. So hopefully that's a satisfactory answer to the question. Duars says the Phrygian word for water appears to have been bedu, which may have been wedu, so something like Wedessa or Wedeta. Then the archaic Greeks dropped the digama sound. Okay. We have Jim. Shout out to Jim in the chat. He says Herodotus is calling them Greek. The first historian calls them Greek. They were Greek and all Greeks were mixed. They were at the borders of Greek mainland, being allowed in the Olympics says it all. So Jim, as you can see on the screen, we can see that King Alexander the First, towards the end of the Archaic period in Greece, when he was still a prince, so not yet a king, he was still prince at the time, he was allowed to participate in the Olympic Games at 504 BC, and he was accepted as being Greek. We know that Olympic Games was reserved for Greeks only, and there were other evidence as well. Not only these the ancient Greek historians, as you mentioned, Jim, there were also ancient Roman writers who did write of the Macedonians. I believe there's a quote from the Romans saying that Macedonians, they have the same speech as Epirotes and Acarnanians and Aetolians. Aetolia is a region to the west of Delphi, also speaking the mentioned northwestern Greek Doric dialect, and the Romans considered Macedonians to have the exact same speech as Aetolians, who are the neighbors of Delphians. So, so yes, I don't see any evidence that points to otherwise, to be honest. Jim says Athenians considered even Spartans barbaric in their ways. Well, I think that Athenians there was, if I'm somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I think that I read somewhere an account of Athenians describing the region of Elis in Peloponnese as quote unquote barbarian, but a paradox is that Elis were the hosts of the Olympic Games, and it was them who got to determine who is Greek and who is not Greek. And it is absurd that here we have Athenians saying that even Eleans, the hosts of the Olympic Games, are somehow barbarians. So Athenians were highly political, especially when their interests were threatened. We do know that Demosthenes, he was very harsh on the Macedonians. He says that they not only they are barbarians, but you cannot find good wine or good slaves. They are not even proper. They're worse than barbarians. That I believe that something along those lines. That's how much Demosthenes disliked Macedonians. The real tomahawk. Karanos is the first king. Karanos the first is a great, 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 great grandson of Heracles. Jim says, crazy fact, great grandpa sided with the Persians one time. Well, yeah, that's correct. Dewar says Athenians loved to throw word barbarian around arbitrarily. They would probably call the Macedonians like how the city folk call rural people. Okay, okay, I see doers. Okay, yeah. Well, that's true. That's true. Athenians were very harsh to a lot of, I think even Aeolians, those from the island of Lesbos, I believe at some point their speech was called barbarian by one of the one of the writers associated with Athens. We have Aeolians also at some point called barbarians. We have Elis, the region of Elis, hosts of the Olympic Games themselves. They had a commission which was their only job was to determine if somebody is Greek or somebody is not Greek so that they can participate in the Olympic Games. So Athenians gave themselves right to say that Eleans were barbarian at some point. So that's very, very interesting approach that the Athenians had. Back in the time, the Athenians wanted Macedonians to be considered non-Greek because they were rivaling with Macedonians while they were trying to conquer the whole Greek world under the Athenian hegemony at the time. This is correct. Okay, so we have went through a quick reiteration of the foundation of Macedon according to the mythological accounts, according to the accounts of Greek tradition, as told by Marsyas of Pella, and then retold and expanded by Eusebius. And thus the kingdom of Macedon was founded by Caranus, but then we also have the reign of Caranus. So we have a few accounts considering his whereabouts as the first king of Macedonia, dated to about 8th century BC, early 8th century. So he had some activity as well. He also conquered the neighboring regions and expanded his kingdom. So it is said that Caranus defeated the neighboring king called Kiseos. So this king is, in some versions of the story, associated with the Thracian tribes. So you can see that besides these early European Phrygians, we also have Thracian tribes inhabiting the area of Macedonia in these early times. So in this war, Caranus and his Argives, which are now known as Macedonians from now on, they are victorious, and they set up Tropion to commemorate this victory. And for those who do not know what Tropion is kind of like a little victory monument which you erect on the location where you won a certain battle, on the location of the battlefield. So it stays there to commemorate your victory. It stays there as a reminder that your army was victorious. It is usually done by putting a big stick or piece of wood into the ground, and then that stick is decorated with an armor or a helmet or some other piece of equipment from the defeated enemy. I will quickly find this to show it to you on the screen, so you know what tropion is. Perfect. All right, so let's put it on the screen so you can see what a tropion is. So this is from a coin. So you can see it right here. There are a few, there are two defeated. I think that this is a Roman coin. So you can see in the middle, you can see a stick, and you can see on top of it, there's an armor with a sword and a shield and a helmet put on a stick. So this is a tropion. This is like a small monument created out of the equipment of the defeated enemy, which stays on the location of a battle on the battlefield to commemorate your victory. And whoever passes by uh, can see the tropion, can see that you had defeated an enemy there. And it's also a reminder to the enemies of their defeat also. So the practice of tropion is very common in Peloponnese, perhaps originating in the Mycenaean times, and it was practiced by the Argives. It was a known practice in Argos. When the army of Argos is victorious somewhere, they put a tropion over there to commemorate their victory. So the army of Karanos, Macedonians being originally from Argos, they kept this practice of tropions, and upon victory they did erect tropion on the battlefield where King Kiseos was defeated, but this tropion was apparently disturbed by a lion from Mount Olympus. This was interpreted as a bad omen by the Greeks, so a terrible sign. You put up a tropion, it's removed by a lion from Mount Olympus, obviously a bad sign from the gods. You should not be doing that. So the Karanos immediately removes tropion altogether, and he forbids practice of tropions to the Macedonians. So I think that he makes a proclamation that neither him or any other succeeding king of Macedonia after him is allowed to ever erect a tropion after a victory. So this was done for two reasons. One reason is a religious reason. It was believed that erection of a tropion was a bad omen if they want Macedonia to to continue to exist, to be successful, to continue to have a favor of the gods, they shall not erect tropaions after their victories. The second reason is to avoid hostile neighbors, because many of these neighbors which early Macedonians were conquering were not Greek tribes. They were Thracian tribes, Phrygian tribes, and they did not look kindly upon this humiliation of tropaions being erected after they were defeated. So, to avoid hostile relations with many of their neighbors, it was also practical not to humiliate them with these tropaions. So, the tropaions as a practice was forbidden by Caranus and never again practiced in Macedonia. Now we can see on the screen we have the city of Aigai, the old capital of Macedonia. In some versions of the story, it was established by Caranus himself. So Edessa was renamed to Aigai, and that continued to serve as a capital until the classical or late archaic times when Pella was declared the new capital of the kingdom. In another version of the story, Caranus did rule from Edessa, and it was only during the reign of Perdiccas I, so his great grandson, that Pella was either set up as a new capital or that Edessa was renamed, that Aigai was set up as a new capital other than Edessa, or that Edessa was renamed into Aigai. So those are the two versions. We are not completely sure. There are some, I think, contradictions of the location of the city of Edessa. So if the location of this original Edessa is the same location of the Aigai, then obviously it was Edessa which was renamed into Aigai, and then okay, we have a super chat from Jim in the chat. Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciated. And we will read, well, you did not leave a comment, but we will also give you a shout out on the beginning of the next episode, which is what we always do with these super chats. Thank you very much. So, where was I interrupted by this? This a great gesture of Jim. So we're talking about uh, Aigai and Edessa. So yes, it depends on the location, because there's another location of a town which is also called Edessa, which is perhaps named in early modern times, I believe, not necessarily associated with the ancient Edessa. So we are not 100% sure of that. So if the location of Edessa and Aigai are the same, then it's obvious that the original capital was Edessa, which was taken from the Phrygians, early Phrygians, and then renamed to Aigai, either by Caranus himself or by Perdiccas I. But if the Edessa in question is another Edessa, which is a little bit to the north, which you can see on the screen, in the north part of this little purple region of Macedonia. So if we're talking about a different Edessa, then Edessa was taken by Caranus and then moved, the capital was moved to Aigai, either by Caranus or Perdiccas I. All right, so Caranus ends up reigning for 30 years, and he dies of old age after founding the Kingdom of Macedon and expanding it at the expense of Phrygians at first, and then likely Thracians at the expense after the defeat of King Chryseos. And he is succeeded by Koinos, which is one of the two mythological successors of Caranus, for which we have no evidence, I believe. The other one is Thrimias. So Caranus was succeeded by Coinos first, and then Coinos was succeeded by Thremius, and then Thremius was succeeded by Perdiccas I, who is mentioned by Herodotus as being the first king of Macedonia. And that is the story of King Caranus, the founder and the first king of ancient Macedon. All right, let's see what the comments say. We have quite a few comments from Jim. Actually, I was usually I go through a segment and then I take a little break to see what's happening in the chat, and I answer some questions from the chat. Usually I don't do it in the middle of a segment, but Jim says, fun fact, the Greek word astello and the word horata means joke. Astello means city thing, quote unquote. Horato means village stuff. Athenians had city-state like lifestyle, but Macedonians were villagers under a king. What you were saying before for urban rural conflicts. Tropaion is a C for Winner's Cup in modern Greeks trophy. Okay. I equals E at the Hellenistic times. Yeah, it does look like a trophy. So I think there's a linguistic connection there. Well, I'm sure there is. Jim says, I think your work is worth a lot more. I'm sorry for interrupting. Um, Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jim. So, like I said, we will be back next week with more live episodes, and then after that we will be back with regular program, which we haven't been doing for 2-3 months now. I think the last video that we did, the last regular episode, was actually the Brigoi, aka the European Phrygians. So check that out on 1x TV. And before that, we did an episode Origins of the Minoans. So make sure to check out those two episodes. But we're coming back in December. We're coming back this month with a big documentary, Etruscan Civilization, 2 hours or very close to 2 hours. We'll go through complete history of the Etruscans, their origins, their language, their religion, their customs, the status of women in Etruria, their relations with the Greeks, with the Carthaginians, with the Celtic peoples, with the Italic peoples, with the Romans, of course, many wars and battles that the Etruscan city-states had with Rome. We will go through a lot of individuals, the Etruscan rulers, the Etruscan zealots. Zealot is equivalent of a consul in Etruscan city-state, or equivalent to archon in Athens. So we will go through a lot of names of prominent Etruscan leaders. We'll go through the Vipina brothers. We'll go through the Spurina family. We'll go through Hulknie family. A lot of very important Etruscan individuals from the city-states, such as Tarcuna, aka Tarquinia, from Veii, in Etruscan language known as Veis, and many other Etruscan city-states. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be the best episode we've ever done. Jim says, do you think there is any relation to Etruscans and Minoans or Trojans? I think that it's impossible for me to say. I think it's up for speculation. Mythology, they originated from the island of Lemnos through or originating from some Lydian migrants, and then Pelasgian settlers, Pelasgian migrants from the island of versions. In another version, such as Dionysius of Halicarnassus, he says that he is aware of those versions, but he believes that Etruscans are natives to central Italy. I tend to agree with Dionysius of Halicarnassus. So, estate care, MV, great topic tonight. Really enjoying. Shout out to estate care. Let's go. Uh, So yes, I think it's up for speculation. I do not think Italy and Minoans, obviously being pre-Indo-Europeans inhabitants of Crete, whether or not all or many of the pre-Indo-Europeans are related to each other and to which degree, we are not sure. So I have no answer to that question. And when it comes to the Trojans, once again, very tough for me to say, especially during these early Bronze Age times when we do know that archaeological site of Troy was in fact inhabited, but we have no evidence whatsoever on who these early inhabitants were. So I am not sure, to be honest. That's my answer. They say Eteocretan may be close to Etruscan. Well, Eteocretan is a term that ancient Greeks used for native Cretans or Minoans. Uh, Minoans called themselves just Cretans. They were known to the Egyptians as Keftiu, which means Crete, so they were just known as Cretans. Etio means true, so this is an ancient Greek addition to differentiate them from the Greek settlers to the region. We have Etiocretans, which means native or true Cretans. We have Etiocypriots, which means native or true Cypriots on the island of Cyprus. So they did not call themselves Etiocretans. Yanis says Etruscans were Pelasgian Greeks, the same with the Trojans and the Paphlagonians and the Tyrsanians of Lemnos. They were all Greeks. The Minoans were Greeks too, but they were not Etruscans. Okay. I think that we will circle back to the Pelasgians at the beginning of the new year after we are done with the Etruscans. I think that we'll come back to the Pelasgian topic, which is very interesting. I think that the most popular video on this channel is who were the Etruscans. If you write on YouTube I'm sorry, Pelasgians. If you type on YouTube who were the Pelasgians, 1xTV video is gonna pop up first, and I think we have over 130,000 views, if I'm correct. I'm not sure, but that's the most popular video on the channel. So we owe it to the Pelasgians to revisit the topic, perhaps talk about some mythological stories involving Pelasgians, maybe hypothesize on the Pelasgian language, maybe expand on some other Pelasgian related stuff. We'll see, but either way, thank you very much for being here. I think that we're going to conclude this episode right now, and we will be back this coming week. We have a few episodes which we are working on at the moment. One of them is Colchis in the Bronze Age, which was a winning topic of. It's going to be a surprise. Either way, stay